Good day, everybody. Welcome to Shepherd's Corner. Now, if you're watching this on the 16th of March, you know what I'm going to say. Happy birthday, Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon. How are you, sir?
You'll be a day early, but that's okay. I will accept it still. Thank you very much, Reverend Deacon. I'm doing well.
I have to do, boy, listen, I'm always late, so I decided to throw it in 1 day early.
This time, you can't count you for being late.
Well, we are having a conversation to heal a nation haunted by trauma. What a conversation, and how? So my question is, to heal a nation haunted by trauma, what's this trauma you're talking about? And how do we chart then a way forward for Trinidad and Tobago if we have this problem?
Well, it's a hard question. It's a long answer. So buckle up, just, journey with me now. Journey with me through this one, okay? You see, the solution to every challenge begins with recognizing that we have a challenge. And the second part is understand what the challenge is. I think we reached this wonderful crossroads in TNT where everybody's frustrated and everybody's feeling a certain burden of nationhood. And in our frustration and our sense of the burden of nationhood that we're feeling, we are reacting to each other and to things in ways that are giving us a sense of ease, but I'm not sure that they're really moving the nation, the citizens, the family, the church, ourselves forward. And that's really where we have to start this conversation. In TNT, all too often, our first response to a challenge is to assume that the solution is somewhere else outside of us, and somebody else has a responsibility for solving the problem. And so we heap onto some people all of the weight of the problem, and we absolve ourselves from any weight of the problem and from any responsibility for engaging solutions. And I don't think that that's a great thing to do. I think, we have to start recognizing that if we are in the dire challenge that we're in Trinidad and Tobago, you and I are part of this problem. You and I are part of this solution. We're not the only ones, but we have to be part of it. And we have to see ourselves as taking some of the burden of responsibility in charting and finding a way forward for us.
I was watching a Jordan Peterson blog, and that's exactly what he said. It's so easy for us to criticize, but when we have to become part of the solution, and in part of the solution, it takes a lot of energy, effort, pain, and so on. But
yes,
what is the way to go?
Yes. As long as we absolve ourselves of any responsibility for solving the problem, the nation can't move forward.
But but some people feel that their way is to criticize, because that's the easiest thing to do.
Well, we went down that road already.
Yeah.
Criticism is on the lower ends of the spectrum of Bloom's taxonomy, which has to do with intellectual capacity. Maybe you could put criticism as part of analysis, maybe, in which case it could be up to a higher level. But if it is part of analysis, it's not all of analysis. And it's not all of it's not into evaluation at all.
Correct.
So it's not into creation. So as long as we believe that our civic responsibility ends when we have criticized whatever it is we're criticizing, then we miss the bus. We don't understand what civic responsibility is, and we don't understand what it is to be a nation. And we don't understand our role and responsibility in nationhood.
I would like to say that, you know, a lot of people do it that way. They criticize, they pull down because you're not doing it right, or this is the problem, but without advancing a solution and saying, I want to be part of this solution. You see, it takes away from the glory. So,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
I don't want to share my ideas with you because you might be the one in power and you will get the you know, all the trophies.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, in Trinidad, every Trinidadian and Tobagonian is an expert at the job that they do not have.
I never heard that one. That's a classic.
Every Trinidadian and Tobagonian is an expert in the job they do not have. The job that they actually have, everybody outside believes they're doing a terrible job. But the job they do not have, they believe that that person is doing a terrible job. And if I had that job, this is how I would do the job 10 times better than anybody who has the office at this moment. Well, okay. Yeah. And I get that, you know. I get that. But let us at least accept that our role is to support and to encourage and to take responsibility to move us forward as a nation. Now, arguably, some people have more responsibility in that than others. Arguably. Leaders have more responsibility because they have the position and therefore have to be held to a high standard of accountability and responsibility. But they're not the only ones. That's the point. The point is we all have to realize that we have to be part of a solution. Many need to be held accountable for their actions, especially when you have an office and you are not fulfilling what your office demands, and you're not serving the nation in a way that is suitable, or the organization, or the club, or the group, or the school, or whatever it is. But the other truth is, leaders can only lead when people are willing to follow. If everybody in a club decides they're not listening to the leader, they're not following the leader, they're not abiding with the leader, if everybody on a football team decides that they're not following the captain, there's a problem. If everybody on a ship decides that they're not following the captain of that ship, there's a problem. That's why they have laws of mutiny. And you know that, good sir.
I know that.
Because that barking is right up your tree now.
Correct.
So if we understand that the first challenge, the first solution to every challenge begins by recognizing we have a challenge. The second, we have to recognize we are part of the solution. And after that, we could then start looking at ways forward. You know, Albert Einstein, the great physicist, has famously said, no problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it.
Wow. You had to decode that one from Albert Einstein. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it.
So if here in our Shepherd's Corner, you and I created a problem, the solution of the problem can't come from you and I at the same level of consciousness and thinking that we were in when we created the problem. Okay. We have to jump a level of consciousness and thinking.
Correct.
If we're going to be finding solutions to the problem that we created. And that's a really interesting notion, because it says that solutions aren't immediately obvious to the eye and to the people who have created the problem.
That is for certain. I've seen that in what you call it, even in office dynamics. Even the office dynamics is yet.
If you created the problem and you haven't changed modalities or levels of consciousness, the problem and its solution is not obvious to you.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes you need some outside eyes and some outside ears to say, hey, look, this is
have
what
you considered this, or have you considered that? And many times people say, oh gosh, no, I really didn't see that. There's a wonderful story that Stephen Covey tells of being on a train on a Sunday morning, just wanting quiet. And a man and his children come in, and the children are just all over the place, making racket and noise, and really making a grand set of mayhem in the carriage. And all around him, and the carriage is practically empty, but all around him, this mayhem is going on, and he's getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And then eventually, when he can't take it anymore, he looks at the man and he says, you think we could do something to get a little quiet here? And the man looks up and says, oh, I'm really sorry. My wife just died. And yeah, the children are a little bit much, but sorry, I've just been lost in my own grief. Immediately, you have a different feeling for those children, don't you?
Absolutely.
Immediately, you go from outrage at how could he allow these children to be making so much noise around me to, oh Lord, what are these children facing, and how are they going to face this loss of their mother? The shift in the paradigm from my quiet, my space, Sunday morning, empty carriage, all the noises around me, to these children have just lost their mother, that's a shift in consciousness.
Yeah.
And that immediately changes how you see that problem. Immediately. And it also changes what you're about to do next.
Correct. I could just see that shift immediately, where everything was affecting you, and therefore how you were feeling, and your world is upside down.
It's no longer about you anymore,
Correct.
It's now about these kids that have lost their mother, and this man has just lost his wife. Shift. Bam. That's an example of what Einstein is saying, that no problem can be solved at the same level of consciousness that created it. If you had no more information, consciousness, about the situation and the context of the man and his children, your solution can't solve the problem. From the moment you step into another paradigm, compassion, all of a sudden, the problem becomes fairly clear, and the solution and its pathway becomes crystal. So here's the second thing that we need to understand. The level of consciousness, the level of consciousness that created the problem is not the level of consciousness with which we can solve the problem. We need to understand the level that created the problem, and then we have to find a way to shift the paradigm or to shift the consciousness, to look at the problem from another perspective, a higher perspective.
Yeah. I was listening to, again, Jordan Peterson on a number of problems, and he say, if we can get people out of hunger and solve the problem of hunger for over 1 billion people, then a lot of things will shift, because then people will then be more conscious of the environment. People will be more conscious of a lot of things. But if I am there, then
I have no consciousness of nothing else.
Correct.
And so to solve the problem, we have to shift the consciousness.
Right.
Another good example, a great example. So I want us then, with that behind us, I want us to go back to a quote we heard last week from George Lamin in his Coming Home. And I think everybody knows George Lamin is one of these great Caribbeanists. His writings are legendary. His insights are acute, really, really good. He says, I do not think there has been anything in human history quite like the meeting of Africa, Asia, and Europe in this American archipelago we call the Caribbean. But it is so recent since we assumed responsibility for our own destiny that the antagonistic weight of the past is felt like an inhibiting menace. And that is the most urgent task and the greatest intellectual challenge. How do we control the burden of this history and incorporate it into our collective sense of the future?
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I know I've seen why the headline is to heal a nation haunted by trauma.
Yeah. So if we go back to Lamin, and I think Lamin is right, you know. The Holocaust was terrible. And let's not compete for victimhood around here. Okay? Let's just not compete for victimhood. The raping and pillaging of Africa was terrible. Apartheid was crazy. Northern Ireland was crazy. Plenty of examples all over the world of really terrible, terrible atrocities hit upon a people. Lamin says, you know, in human history, the meeting of Africa, Asia, and Europe in the American archipelago called the Caribbean, he doesn't think there's anything quite like that anywhere in the world. One writer defines it as demography by fiat. You have to understand the mass migration to this place and in different circumstances. Okay. But the next piece is what is more important. It is so recent since we have assumed responsibility for our own destiny.
Right.
That's 1962, you know.
Yeah.
That's the other day. That the antagonistic weight of the past is felt like an inhibiting menace. Now, only a great author, Caribbeanist, literature man, could put this together in such a beautiful, succinct way. Huh? The antagonistic weight of the past is felt like an inhibiting menace. And then he says, and that is the most urgent task and the greatest intellectual challenge. How to control the burden of the history and incorporate it into our collective sense of the future. And you know, that's really what I've been doing through the articles on Carnival. Huh? And then after that, through the articles on Trinidad as a Real Place. That's what I mean. How do we really take on the burden of the history and incorporate it into our collective sense of a future? And the key word is collective, you know. The key word is collective, because the collective sense of the future has to be for those descendants of Africa, Asia, and Europe, and the Caribbean. And we have to find a collective future that helps us to move beyond the burden of the past. And that really is a challenge. And when you look at, you know, Trinidad is not a real place, that's part of what we're dealing with. Rather than getting a collective future, what we have is a making light and slight of the present, which is mimicking a colonial past and a colonial perspective. So if Lamming is right, and I've thought about this a lot, I think he actually has hit the nail on the head on this one. Flaming is right. Then we need to, there's something we have to do to find our collective future.
And I want to use the word, when he says our collective sense of the future, it means that he's saying the word that I like there is our. See,
yes.
Our. So it's
yes.
all of us have to be part of the solution.
Yes. Yes.
And contribute to the sense of this new future which must come about.
And this collective future.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to what we're doing right now. I really believe right now the burden of nationhood is weighing on us the heaviest that it has for a long time. 1970, 1990, it weighed heavily. Huh? I think today is weighing really heavily. And I don't think people have understood that we are still reacting to COVID. The shutdown, the trauma of that, and all, and because of all of that, the hyper negativity is the result of what we're dealing with from there. And when I see learned people not understanding that negativity and social analysis are not the same thing. They're not the same thing. They're two totally different things. Negativity is when all we could see is the glass half empty, everything bad, and everything is rubbish, and we're degrading. Social analysis requires the higher order skills of analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes on to evaluation.
Right.
Then we could get to creation.
Correct. Yeah.
And the creativity to generate a collective future. But as long as all we're doing is the tearing down of the place and personalities, we're not engaging in our collective sense of the future. And we're actually making that much more difficult because we're creating chasms and schisms and enemies when we are all in the barrel as a pile of crabs pulling each other down. That's not helping. It just has not helped. Let's at least stop and say, all right, I'm feeling the burden. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. Okay. We're all feeling it. Those who have nothing to eat, them feeling it worse than everybody else. Those who have lost their jobs, feeling it even worse. Those who have lost loved ones and haven't been able to mourn them feeling it even worse. Those who have lost 2 years of education because they didn't have no device, or they didn't have electricity, they didn't have whatever it is they didn't have, they're feeling it even worse. So plenty of people feeling it. How do we control the burden of this history and incorporate it into our collective sense of the future? That's really, to me, that's the crossroads Trinidad and Tobago has come to. So heal a nation haunted by trauma.
I taking us back to the Panyard. I am taking us back to the Panyard where you say, hey, the solution is right there in the Panyard. As the collective, what is our goal? Hey, we want to be the best that we could be. And so everybody has to come on board.
And if we go back to the Panyard, we have to say what the Panyard has different is the Ubuntu philosophy.
Correct.
I am because we are. And that sense of I am my brother and my sister's keeper. And that sense that if the man or woman next to me not getting the tune, is my responsibility to help them get it. Because otherwise they train me off, they train the band off, and we can't win unless we become we. And that is a national model of development that Trinidad could do with a great dose of right now. It's we. It's we. It's not you, it's not you, it's not you, it's we. Our collective sense of the future. And that's where the Ubuntu philosophy that is driving the steel band movement in Trinidad and Tobago takes that movement up to a whole other level and offers the nation a way forward. A way forward. You know, in government, in all the utilities, the churches, education, crime, corruption, healthcare, road maintenance, conducting regular business that you have to conduct no matter what you're doing, paying a light bill, a telephone bill, land tax, water rates. In whatever you do, we are all struggling with serving the people and the nation in a meaningful way that creates a sense of a collective future.
Wow.
In every turn, every time you turn to do anything at all, we're struggling with serving the people and the nation. We're struggling hard with it. And sometimes we ain't struggling, we just give up and we just not doing it. Okay. Until we are willing to realize it's about us, not about you, not about him, not about she, until we realize it's about us, then none of those institutions I just called are going to get any better. Because those institutions have become worse and worse and worse because we have only looked at, for me, what's in it for me? And therefore, it's not a question of I have been called to serve and I've been entrusted with this responsibility to serve the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So my friends and my people will get everything they need. But that's not a collective sense of a future. And that's not creating nationhood. That's one of the big challenges that we are really facing. You know, Lloyd Best said we unresponsible. He coined a new word, you know. That is incapable of taking responsibility. Irresponsible is we know what we're supposed to do, but we just ain't doing it. Unresponsible is that we are incapable of taking responsibility. Terence Farrell says, we like it so, pointing to the cultural roots of our underdevelopment, or our underachievement. Naipaul would say we are Picaroon society. What if we arrived at another level of consciousness so we could better understand the menace of our history and find a collective way forward?
Menace of our history, the menace of our history, and find a collective way forward. Well, then we have to, we have to then look at it from a different place, because it's our collective future that we want to achieve the best, go back to the steel band,
yes,
collectively.
I am because we are.
Yes.
Ubuntu.
Remember you spoke about the little 5-year-old boy. Colin was telling you about the little 5-year-old boy coming in there and totally
traumatized.
Yes.
And short time later, my boy playing pan, playing the tune, he get it, smiling ear to ear, because all the children around helped him get past his learning challenge and get to play in the pan. So I'm hearing the lament about great thinkers, and I'm asking myself also, I wonder if we are approaching it at a new level of consciousness from the consciousness that has caused the problem. And I don't know. I want to venture into those murky waters though. And that's where I'm going to trauma. There are many studies on the impact of trauma on individuals and nations that have really shown the trauma is not just some, we use the word real casually. Oh God, you traumatized me. Some little piece of foolishness happening. Okay. We draw the word out of the holster real quick, real easy. But there's studies about trauma that have given definitions and helped understand ways of operating and responding. I've been wondering for a little while if an understanding of trauma may provide us as Trinidad and Tobago with a better perspective to look at our current state. I've really been wondering about that. It's the same way that when the man in the train recognized this was grief, his response was different. If it was just that these were hooligan children that had no care about anybody else, his response would be different. But if the response is grief and you treat the child like a hooligan set of children, your response doesn't solve the problem.
Right. And I like that, what you just mentioned there. Maybe we need to understand our trauma and what caused us to react and to behave this way. Then what, with that consciousness, we can then move forward. Because the man in the train then was, the trauma of the husband and the children came to his consciousness.
Correct. And his response was helpful to them.
Correct.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about the loss of your wife. Is there anything I can do to help you? Totally different response now. And that's why the level of consciousness is so important. That's why Einstein's statement is so important. So the Canadian Center for Addiction and Mental Health, CMH, gives us a working definition of trauma. Trauma is the lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event. Experiencing a traumatic event can harm a person's sense of safety, sense of self, the ability to regulate emotions, and to navigate relationships. Long after the traumatic event occurred, people with trauma can often feel shame, helplessness, powerlessness, and intense fear.
But you could drop that straight into our Caribbean people.
Here the last piece, huh? People with trauma can often feel shame. We have a high degree of shame in our nation. Helplessness, go back to Lloyd Best, unresponsibility. Powerlessness, go back to Lloyd Best, unresponsibility. And Terry Farrell's Underdeveloped Mud, We Like It So. And intense fear.
Yeah, but what I like in that is the definition that says long after the traumatic event occurs.
Good. Correct. Correct. So the trauma happens, you experience the trauma, but long after that, you can still feel shame, helplessness, powerlessness, intense fear. Still. So if you're feeling shame, helplessness, powerlessness, and intense fear, odds are we're dealing with trauma. Odds are we're dealing with trauma. Now, I know, okay? I know we tend to have a fear of labels, and I know we suspect that using a psychological diagnosis, we are letting people off the hook. I understand all of that, okay? But those children in the train, no amount of discipline was going to help them. So raising our level of consciousness to the actual challenge that is happening is key to finding a solution and key to finding a collect response of our future. Now, let's just look for a while at the micro level of the problem first. Then I'll come back to the macro level. Our recent spate of school violence has been alarming, to say the least. It really alarmed me. And I mean, and I've gone into schools because of it engaged with kids because of this. Have we really inquired deeply enough to understand the real nature of the challenge? You know, I see the ministry came out very quickly with protocols and disciplinary measures and police and the full 9 yards. And yes, we can't let this thing explode and get out of hand. I'm not knocking that at all. But if we attempt to regulate this kind of violence by external controls, the police, the threat of severe consequences, or the use of power, we might curtail the activity and the behavior briefly. But these controls may not address the root cause of the problem. If the man in the train shouted at the children and quarreled with the father and was demeaning or abusive or using power even respectively, it would not have addressed the root cause of the problem. It would not have.
And this takes me back to Jordan Peterson, when he talked about the poverty, if he talked about people are going hungry, and therefore they can't see anything else.
No.
So therefore, he feels we need to address the problem at that level. And let's look at the children who are fighting, quarreling, beating up. What is the root of this problem there? Is it poverty?
Right.
What is it? No food at home came. We just talked about the trauma, and part of the trauma is shame, lack of self-esteem, all of these things.
All of that. So many of the children have spent the last 2 years at home with little socializing among their friends, with little supervision, in houses that are not spacious, where family members get into each other's face constantly. And they're lacking money because the parents weren't working. Because if you are living in that level of society, then you probably didn't get an income during the 10 months of being shut down. Now, that's crazy, okay? And this experience, to say the least, just could not have been easy. In 2 years, you had 10 months where we were shut down as a nation, where many adults were not working, where food at the home would have been scarce, and even disposable income of any form of fashion would have been nearly nil. Now, when you're out and about in school, you have to remember the children have the school feeding program, so at least Monday to Friday, they're getting good nutrition. The poorer children who need, they're getting a meal Monday to Friday. Now, you're locked down for 10 months. Where are they getting their meal from? They try different things. I'm not sure how well it works. But the thing is, these unsupervised children, what were they doing? And how have we understood them? So in one of the schools I went to recently, one young man was deemed a troublemaker at school. And I had a one-on-one with him, and we were speaking about him. How was COVID? He said, normal. I said, yeah, but what was going on in COVID? He said, well, I had fun, I used to go and raid people trees and pick fruit. I said, why? So well, they give me something to do and they give me something to eat. A man ran me off a tree and he all drowned. And then we spoke a little more, we spoke a little more. When I pressed him, I said, but how was it really? He said, my father does drink. I said, yeah? How is that? He said, then he's beat me. Now, I hope you're feeling it, I hope you're feeling it. Because it's easy to label that boy as a troublemaker, When I tell you, you have all the antics. All the antics. And at the same time, what we have is a child who has, I believe, we should be asking about trauma on this child. I really believe that. Because if you're living in a house where dad is alcoholic and abusive, then you're dealing with multiple exposures to trauma on a weekly basis. Then what you're dealing with is not a troublesome or a bad child. You're dealing with something totally different. You know, in all my years working with young men on the streets, or who would have been on the streets except for Marian House program, every single one of them had a most marvelous, wonderful child inside of them. And the job of the caregiver is to find that child. And when you do, you see something that is precious. Really, really precious. Now, this child I would propose is not a troublemaker. I believe the child is traumatized. And the trouble is, the symptom of the ailment is not a definition of the child. So the symptom is that he creates havoc and causes trouble whenever things get a little too uncertain for him. That's the symptom. But that's not the definition of that child. A better definition is that, yeah, that child has been through real rough family of origin and has been experienced from his dad what no child should experience. At the risk of being an armchair psychologist, I believe we should be inquiring whether this child is suffering some form of post-traumatic stress disorder, some form of PTSD. Why? Well, all of the guy's antics are better described by PTSD than by labeling him as a bad child. Trauma haunts us in so many ways. It stays with us. It's stored in our bodies. It produces irrational behaviors that we would misinterpret if we don't know what we're looking for. And so what I am proposing is that if we look at that child, we could just say troublemaker. Or if we look at that child, we could say, wow, that child is doing exceptionally well for the levels of trauma he experiences. I remember in Miguel Street, V.S. Naipaul had a beautiful line, you know, in the beginning of the book. He says a stranger could drive through Miguel Street and see a disordered, poor, shanty community. But for us who live here, it's a world. When you move from the observer's view to the insider's view, you have to shift your consciousness to do that. And if you're shifting your consciousness, then your solution now is very, very different. Yes, we need to tighten up on security. Yes, we need to apply very clear measures of and penalties for actions that are not socially acceptable. Yes, we need to make children accountable for their actions. But that's not going to solve the problem unless we understand the problem at a deeper level. That child is traumatized, probably suffering from PTSD.
My thing is that I really feel that the investment that we would make in dealing with it from that level is far less than building jails, putting more money into weapons and armored vehicles.
Spending money with a battery of psychologists and social workers in our schools right now. Send them in right now. Trace the challenges right back to the parents. Let's teach that battery of operators how to do trauma counseling. There are some simple things that a first responder can do to help a child or person reconnect the brain after trauma. Let's do adolescent development for that whole group of kids and get them to re-socialize. There's so many things we can do. If we see the child and say troublemaker, well, our response is going to be a punitive response. And by saying traumatized, I'm not saying we let the child off the hook and let them do what they want to do. I'm saying we hold them to a higher level of accountability. It requires more love, more patience, more consciousness, and a different way forward in terms of healing the burden of that child's past.
I'll go back to the Bible. Hold on, landowner. Let me dig around that tree. Let me apply some manure. And if you come back in 1 year, it's not bearing fruit, then you can cut it down.
Absolutely. 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 I found the young man to be very perceptive and engaged. Mm-hmm. He wanted to connect, and he really wanted to be validated. And if the adults around him apply severe penalties and discipline without seeking to understand and heal the trauma, I think he would just drop out of education real quick. He wouldn't hang around terribly long because he can't take another trauma from the institution with what he's already having at home. I think he just leave school and become a major challenge to society going forward. The child has charisma. He attracts others to him. He's a leader, and therefore we know where he's heading. You see, I know because most of the gang leaders that I have met and worked with had serious learning challenges. And you know, they were disciplined in school rather than diagnosed. They were punished rather than educated. They emerged to torment the village and the nation because we had the wrong diagnosis of them and we applied the wrong remedy to them. Every single one of them I spoke to, when I asked them about their school experience, one man told me, I was holding up the doorway more than I sat down in my seat. So how we understand level of consciousness again determines what we see, determines the solution we have for going forward. You know, Raquel, in an article in Scientific American, July 2022, proposes that trauma is transmitted to children, which is new stuff, eh? Mm-hmm. This is new stuff. And this new stuff is emerging now because we have a lot more insight into the brain and into the workings of the brain. A lot more insight now. And they have a lot more tests we can do now in terms of brain activity and neuroscience. Now, after the attack on the World Trade Center in 2001, she evaluated 187 pregnant women. And she found, in her words, many were in shock, and a colleague asked if I could help diagnose the mothers and monitor them. Well, the mothers were at risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, from what they had experienced. They were experiencing flashbacks, nightmares, emotional numbness, or other psychiatric symptoms for years after these things were just happening to them. Many of the mothers had developed PTSD, and this was confirmed by the low levels of the stress-related hormone, cortisol.
Cortisol, yeah.
Cortisol. But the impact on the babies was what nobody anticipated.
Wow.
You know, she replied, and this is her words, surprisingly and disturbingly, the saliva of the 9-month-old babies of the woman with PTSD also showed low cortisol.
Wait.
The effect was most prominent in babies whose mother had been in their 3rd trimester on the fateful day of 9/11. Just a year earlier, a team that she had led had reported low cortisol levels in adult children of Holocaust survivors. But they had assumed then that it had something to do with being raised by parents who were suffering from the long-term emotional consequence of the severe trauma. Now, looking at the 9/11 victims and survivors, together with the Holocaust survivors, she says, it looks like trauma leaves a trace in offspring even before they are born.
Wow. That's amazing.
Swallow this one, eh?
No. That is so big, you know. Because we have a level of psychology that deals with original pain. And in the womb. So this is confirming that, listen, these children were affected in the womb by the trauma that their parents were going through.
And this is physiological, okay?
Wow.
This what their test is a saliva test for checking the levels of cortisol and seeing. And when they checked these levels, their surprise was not just the woman who went through the trauma, the babies in the womb also displayed high levels of trauma. Now, I wanted to, I'm exploring, okay? I'm exploring. I'm not a psychologist. I can't diagnose, but I'm exploring an idea that I think is an important idea. She went on to do more tests on children of Holocaust survivors and on people who suffered from abuse and the children of the survivors of rape and abuse and other diagnosed with PTSD and their children. And her conclusion, adverse experiences can change future generations through epigenetic pathways.
Whoa.
Adverse experiences can change future generations through epigenetic pathways. Okay? Now, that is a serious thing, eh? That's really serious.
That's bigger than serious, because I want to share this. What we are seeing also in terms of violence in schools, I want to hear me where we're going.
Yeah.
A lot of it are girls we are seeing, young ladies in violence.
Yeah.
Now, yes, we know we have the boys, but we are seeing more of the girls coming forth. And I've been taking note of this. Now,
yes,
Archbishop G, there is a fact, and we are seeing it now. The statistics show that sometimes 1 in 4 girls are being abused at a young age. 1 in 4. So if we're looking at PTSD, and the trauma coming out, you could see these girls mad, enraged, loss of self-esteem, all the things that come out of trauma.
Yes. You know, if the conclusion is that adverse experiences can change future generations through epigenetic pathways, that means that the mother passes on the trauma to the child through genetics. Okay? I want you to consider this for a moment. Mom passes on trauma to the child through genetics. Okay? Now, when you consider the events of slavery and the trauma it inflicted on millions of Africans for over 200 years in this region, you need to ask about the role of trauma in our post-colonial society. When you consider Indian indentureship had its own traumatic experiences, you have to ask yourself about the role of trauma in this society. And all I'm saying, all I'm saying is if we fail to recognize our challenge and continue to misdiagnose our young people, we'll be applying the wrong solution and we'll be adding to the burden of the past rather than healing it and finding a pathway to a better collective sense of our future. But not only that, if we continue misdiagnosing Trinidad and Tobago, we will be applying the wrong solutions, the wrong diagnosis, and then the wrong solutions. And we'll be adding to the burden of the past rather than healing it and finding a pathway to a better collective sense of our common future.
Well, to heal our nation haunted by trauma, I love this conversation, but I think that I'm hoping that a lot of people watch this. I hope a lot of people are watching this because I think we've been misdiagnosing what the trauma that we are going through or misdiagnosing the challenges that we are going through. But I know you have a key message for us, in. You have to have a key message.
Yeah. Finding the right diagnosis is vital to helping TNT find pathways to development. In other words, pathways to a collective sense of our future. Trauma may be an important paradigm to view the learned helplessness that seems to plague us, that has captivated so much attention and so much berating. If in fact trauma is passed on by epigenetics, then we have some work to do. And it's not going to be by the rod of discipline that we're going to turn the children around. It's actually going to be by the love and care of helping our young people and us as older people work through the trauma and find a pathway to a better collective future.
And I think, instead of pointing fingers or criticizing this race or that race, you talked about our collective future. The Ubuntu, I am because we are, therefore
Ubuntu.
we should all.
Ubuntu. So my action step, reflect a lot more deeply on the paradigm or the tool you use to evaluate, to diagnose the people around you. When you see children in different kinds, do we just label them as troublemakers, mischievous, or however was the frame of consciousness that we're using to look at each other? When your husband, your wife, your child, do we just label them as stupid or as ignorant or as this or that without trying to really step a moment in their shoes? The old proverb, you never know somebody till you walk a mile in the moccasins. And maybe walking a mile in the moccasins of another person might be a way of helping us to become to get a more adequate understanding of what really we're dealing with, the challenge that is facing us as a nation. Scripture reading. Rather, this is from Luke 6:35-38. Rather, you must love your enemies and do good to them, and lend without expecting any repayment. In this way, you will receive a great reward. You will be sons of the Most High, for he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. That is really a beautiful text. Do not judge, and you yourself will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you yourself will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. The measure that you use for others will be used to measure you. Boy.
Amen.
Let we pray.
Amen.
Let we pray. Father, we thank you for this opportunity of exploring our beautiful and beloved nation and what is its real challenge that we are working with here. We ask that you give us insight and open minds that we may find pathways to see, to understand, and to find the way forward as a nation through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you so much, Archbishop G. To heal a nation haunted by trauma, watch it. Pick up your Catholic news, and I see it in front ahead of time. Happy birthday, Archbishop Charles Jason God.
Thank you, Reverend Deacon. Thank you, everyone. God bless.
God bless.